Prairie Yard and Garden is a production of the University of Minnesota Morris in cooperation with Pioneer Public Television. Closed captioning is provided by Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. Shalom Hill Farm, shalomhill.org.
As spring arrives, we turn our attention to flower gardens, and one of the first flowers we notice coming to life in the spring is the peony. It's part of our rural heritage, with many farmyards having plants that are more than 50 years old. Modern plant development has recently given us some new choices between the bush and tree form. Creating new color variations is also of interest to peony breeders. Join me on Prairie Yard and Garden as we explore the world of the modern peony. Joining me today is Keith Swenson of Swenson Gardens. He's a organic peony grower, and we're going to talk about the new things that are occurring in peonies during the coming years. But first of all, welcome, Keith. Can you give me a little background on peonies? Where did they originate from, and why are they of such interest?
Well, if you go back to, way back, if we're going into more of the mountainous area in Asia and China and Japan, a lot of the peonies we have today originated from that heritage. Specifically, there's about 13 different species of peonies, and underneath of that, there's about 27 subspecies. So roughly speaking, from the origination, there was 40 different species peonies, and of course today, through hybridizing, that has now grown to over 7,500 different registered peony names. So we go back many years here.
How were they brought to the United States?
Most of the peonies we have in the United States, of course, came over from seeds from China, Japan, and some of the other cultures, other locations. So by bringing the seed over, when that occurred, I don't know, but we've seen peonies and farmsteads, that are well over 100 years old, so we know that those seeds did originate from that area.
Well, that's one of the unique things, I think, of the peony, is it's a very easy plant to take care of.
Well, very easy. Of course, there's three perennials that are the easiest to grow here in our climate. Peonies are good from zone 2, all the way up into Alaska, all the way down to upper zone 7, coastal zone 8. But us here in, zone 4, zone 3, you go a little bit farther south, zone 5, this is the ideal climate for growing peonies.
Tell me a little bit about the variations that we could find in the different styles of peonies.
Well, looking back at again, the origination of peonies was mainly white, pink, and red. But through hybridizers now, we're seeing corals, we're seeing yellows, we're seeing purples. When we look over the field here, there's colors that you've never seen before. It's interesting, we have a cut flower business, and, one year it might be corals. Everybody wants corals.
Yep.
And especially the brides. The brides are the ones that pretty much tell you what colors you need in your wedding. But this year it appears more burgundies, your darker colors, but the array of peonies colors now is significantly different, than my grandma and probably your grandma and grandpa as well.
Well, if there's 7,500 registered varieties, there's got to be a lot of variations.
Yes, and a lot of this When we talk about the modern peony, the newer peony, in peony years, those that were hybridized back in the 40s and the 50s, which we have numbers of here, are actually infants, in the peony world. It's almost like you need to have a plant registered for at least 100 years before you become somebody. So when you're talking about hybridizing peonies, which we've started, but from the time you hybridize to the time you go to market is 15 years. So there's a lot of years that go into coming up with a new peony.
A lot of plants that get discarded in the process.
A significant amount. So you're probably talking, one out of maybe 200 crosses, come out to be a decent plant.
Well, tell me a little bit about these peony crosses. What we're seeing here is bush, and then there's a tree form, and then there's a intersectional.
Yes.
Give me a little background on that.
The two main forms of peonies are, herbaceous hybrid, garden, bush, Chinese. All those are wrapped up into a bush peony, which essentially means the stems die back to the ground in the fall. The other section, of course, is called Mouton, or tree peony. And a tree peony will have a woody stem that does not die back to the ground, but essentially taking the garden peony section, the tree peony section, bringing those two plants together, now we have what's called an intersectional hybrid, sometimes called Edo hybrid peonies. And those, again, in peony years are relatively new.
One of the other things that we know about the peony is, of course, the flower, and there's different styles there. Give me a little background on that. What's my options?
Yeah, there's basically 5 different bloom types. The first bloom is a single, and one thing with singles, you'll find that normally they have stiffer stems, they don't have as much fragrance, the flower may not last as long, as some of the other designs. And then we'll look at what's called a Japanese bloom. And a Japanese, has an outer guard petal with a little tuft of different color in the middle. The third type of bloom is a semi-double, and a semi-double will have 5 to 7 outer guard petals around a rather interesting inside to the plant, your carpels and your stamens and your staminoids and all that good stuff. The fourth type is a double, and I think most of us are probably familiar with doubles. Those are the ones that are the most fragrant. And then the fifth style is what's called a bomb double. And bomb doubles are huge. They have a large ball in the middle with one outer guard petal. So those are basically the 5 different bloom types that you'll have in peonies.
Well, Keith, let's go look at some of your favorite varieties.
That sounds great. Thanks, Larry. Larry, this is actually one of, well, both Becky and I are favorite. This is called Etched Salmon, and it is a double. One of the things we'll notice, this is more of a saucer double. It'll have the nice guard petals around the edge, a nice salmony color, and again, very stiff stems, will not, flop over in storms and that. So a very good this would be a herbaceous hybrid or garden variety.
What is the purpose of that guard petal? Is it protects the flower originally, but then as it opens, what role does it play?
Well, nothing other than to give, again, a saucer-shaped bloom. These, of course, are your first petals that will open up in the bud itself. But again, with 7,500 different types of peonies, there's a lot of different bloom styles. But what we look for, of course, is more of the stiffer stems, stouter stems, so the plants don't flop over. And most of the varieties that we grow, probably 85% of the plants we grow here, do not flop over, in storms and rain and wind.
Well, what other plant have you decided is your favorite?
Well, one of the bomb doubles is called Pink Derby. Wonderful two-tone rose color. That one does need support because the blooms can be as large, depending on the growing year, as soccer balls.
Wow.
So it does need support, but you know, one of the things that we like to tell gardeners is there's peonies that bloom in the early spring, and there's peonies that bloom, you know, in like spring to early summer. The pink derby is a later blooming variety, but that affords additional weeks of color for the gardeners.
Now, you probably could develop a garden around peonies that would have flowers for 6 weeks.
For 6 to 7 weeks, yes.
Well, that'd be a great feature that I wouldn't mind having in my garden.
Yes. Larry, you know, we were talking about the different growing times of the year. This particular flower is called Coral Supreme. Right now, the time that you're in the field, we're right around the mid-bloom, mid to late bloom, but this would be an earlier bloom. This is Coral Supreme is a semi-double, very stiff stem, as you can see. These have went through 3 hailstorms and 63-mile-an-hour winds 2 weeks ago.
Really?
So we get a lot of comments here about why aren't your peonies flopped over with the storms they've been through, and again it goes back to the stiff stems. But this would be an earlier variety, Coral Supreme. One thing, you know, when you note about corals, corals can either go a little bit more whiter, or they can go a very rich coral color. But when corals come out, they're pretty much this color, and then they'll fade into an ivory white, almost yellow. So very, very fun plant for early time of the bloom.
Well, my home is on a hill that is very windy, so
Yes.
Strength of that stem is very important to me.
Yes. And again, garden peony, stems will die back to the ground in the fall. But when you get into some of the newer herbaceous hybrids, one side point here regarding stiff stems, you know, Grandma always had the peonies that smelled very, very, very nice. But when you get into the stiffer stems, you lose the fragrance.
Oh, that's too bad.
So that you can't have both, you know, one without the other, but we will be looking at some very fragrant stiff stem plants as we go to the next spot here. Larry, when we were talking about, you know, intersectional hybrid peonies, with the bloom types, this intersectional hybrid is called unique, mainly because of the color. Very unique red. A lot of the reds that you have will fade, you know, into more of a bluish, pinkish. Sometimes they'll go more whitish color, but unique will keep this vibrant. And again, trying to come up with a name of this red. We have not figured out what this red is, but it's a very showy plant. And as you can see, the different bloom phases of this single, the blooms that we're looking at are actually secondary blooms. When you get into intersectional hybrids, this particular plant will bloom for up to 3 weeks. So you'll have the primary, you know, the primary bloom is already gone. Now we're getting into the secondary, and this plant has already been blooming for about a week and a half. So we have, you know, roughly speaking, this year, you know, another week and a half of color left on these plants. But again, with a single bloom, this one will a little bit better represented here. A single bloom will have 1 to 2 outer guard petals. But this particular variety has 2 outer guard petals. But very fun red color. Singles, again, in the garden give you a lot more height, you know, to your plant, almost a waviness, you know, look to the gardeners. Talking about intersectional hybrids, I wanted to show you this one, not only from a bloom standpoint, This one is called Cora Louise. Inside the bloom are called flares. These purple flares with a white ivory color around, again a semi-double bloom. Very stunning plant. This is a little bit older maturity here as the plant fades. But looking at intersectional hybrids, I wanted to bring you to a point about the foliage. Again, the parent is tree peony, so the tree peony foliage, the tree peony flower, but the garden peony stems that die back to ground in the fall. But a lot of the intersectional hybrids have a nice mounded appearance to the foliage, and we get a lot of questions about, what do we do with the spent blooms? What happens after the blooms are done blooming? And you do want to wait about 2 to 3 weeks after the plant is all done blooming, and you can remove this about 2 to 3 inches underneath the bloom. It helps, tidy up the appearance of the plant, but it does allow a more shrub-like appearance. Again, with the intersectionals, tree peonies have a very distinct leaf pattern, but also a bush type. So 2 to 3 weeks after they're done blooming, you can go ahead and cut them off, and basically you end up with a nice green shrub until the first or second hard frost. And once the plant turns a little brown in the fall, go ahead and cut it down.
You can cut it at that point?
Yeah, cut it down in the fall. Remove the foliage from your site location because that's where a lot of the diseases start, is by not removing all your foliage and your stems from your site location.
Well, I'm impressed that this is a very clean foliage, and certainly that's going to be in the garden for the next couple of months. Something I would be concerned about is if we got disease problems.
Yes, and when you get into some of the garden peonies, there you can see a little difference in foliage. On our website, swensongardens.com, we do have information about the height, the width, as well as does it have good foliage or not, and that's represented by landscape. It shows in there the different characteristics of peonies, but a lot of the intersectionals are wonderful landscape plants that you can enjoy for the rest of the summer and into early to late fall.
I have a question. When is the right time to pick grapes to make wine?
I guess one of the main things is understanding the sugar of the grape, the sugar content, and along with that, you want to know what the acid is doing inside that grape, so that those two can balance each other and provide a nice, flavorful grape, but also give it some good structure. So it can be tricky to understand what's really ripe. But in the field, one of our main tools that we can do to understand this is take a refractometer and take a little drop of juice and put that on a refractometer, and that'll read out basically the percentage of sugar in what we call Brix, a percent Brix. I'll just grab a little berry here off of this cluster, and I got my refractometer here. And we'll take this little grape and squeeze a drop or so, maybe a couple of drops. And we would do this with a number of different berries in the field just to get an idea what the average of our crop is looking like. And now when I look through, that reads out a number in there. These are a late ripening variety, so they're sitting at about 16% sugar at this moment. And hopefully within a few more weeks, we'll be able to gain another 4 or 5 points, Brix, and we'll be at 22 or 23 with these, and they should be ready to harvest at that point.
Ask the Arboretum Experts has been brought to you by the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chanhassen, dedicated to enriching lives through the appreciation and knowledge of plants.
Larry, we're kind of coming to the pinnacle here of peonies, going back into the 70s, when the first yellow peony came over to the United States. This particular variety is Bartzella, again an intersectional hybrid. This was hybridized by a Roger Anderson in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. And most of the intersectional hybrids that we carry here have been hybridized by him. But this particular intersectional hybrid, Bartzella, you know, again, we're talking about, you know, these plants have went through a lot of storms here, but this one smells particularly well. It smells like lemon.
Really?
But, you know, I wish the viewers could
Smell it?
yes, could smell that. But Bartzella will bloom for 3 to 3.5 weeks. We're into the secondary buds right now. You know, most of the primary buds, again, are done blooming. The secondaries are just coming out. But this would be a continuous bloom of the plant over a 3 to 3.5 week period. So lovely plant, you know, again, the mounded foliage.
Well, and I notice on this particular one, it's a much larger flower.
Yes, the primary blooms can be up to 9 to 10 inches across. But again, 3 hailstorms, 63 mile-an-hour winds, and they're still standing. Very, 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 very nice. Another example of an intersectional hybrid, and what's interesting about this is you can see the fading, how the flower, you know, first comes out, you know, with the lavender guard petals, and then it'll fade into a yellowish creamish center. This particular one is called Joanna Marlene. Again, a semi-double. With intersectionals, a lot of times your primary bloom could be double and your secondary bloom could be semi-double. So you get into some really fun things to do with blooms. Joanna Marlene is a rather new intersectional. This was hybridized in 1999. So we're getting into some of the newer varieties as we go.
And one of the things we haven't talked about is that price range is,
Yes.
you get newer ones, of course, are going to be more expensive, but what is the typical range and prices for peonies?
The ones that we handle are anywhere from $20 to $200. It's interesting that we ended up with a $200 plant, you know, Joanna Marlene, but, you know, a lot of that has to do with the uniqueness of the plant, but also the limited availability of plants. And all the ones that we grow here, again, are chemical-free, you know, no synthetic fertilizer. These are grown, you know, as the way, you know, God intended these to grow in people's gardens.
Sure.
So you don't need a lot of fertilizer. You don't need to water them. You know, peonies are very drought-resistant, deer-resistant, and again, the only thing that can have an adverse effect on peonies is overwatering. So it's a very easy plant to grow, and there are, you know, additional information, planting instructions on our website that your viewers are more than, you know, welcome to go to.
One of the things that I've always been told is the critical factor is when you do plant the peony, you can't get the root too deep.
Yes, with intersectional hybrid peonies, we actually put a little red tie on the stem, you know, as far as where the ground level should be. And then that way gardeners, I mean, they're investing a lot of money in these intersectionals, so we want to make sure that they plant them right. But that little red tie then tells them next spring, you know, if it's sunk or if it's raised. But with garden peonies, you know, herbaceous peonies, roughly speaking, the eyes should be about 2 inches, you know, underneath the ground level. And one quick note, you know, we've had a terrible spring here as far as wetness and a lot of rain. And what we do tell gardeners, especially in beds, you know, around their homes, if you have a mulch material, whether it be wood chips or rock, make sure that your site location is at the same height as your mulch. You know, if your ground level is here and your mulch is up here, that site turns into an aquarium and the plant may rot out. So bring your site location up, roughly a nice circle, to about 2 to 3 inches above the ground level, and then bring your mulch right up to that.
Well, Keith, we got one variety we got to go look at, that Japanese yet. Let's go take a look at those.
Okay, thanks. Larry, we're here at a Japanese bloom. This particular plant is called Neon, and as you can tell, it is a color that pops in not only gardens but also in the field here. But when I was talking about on Japanese, and maybe we can take this as an example, again going back to the outer guard petals, and the tuft in the middle is filled with staminoids, carpels, and filaments. But when the sun comes out, I'll bring another one over here. When the sun comes out on this particular variety, it's lined with gold, and it is an amazing bloom. But you'll see other representations of Japanese. You may have one certain color on your guard petals and then a different color on, we call it a tuft in the middle, but that is evident of a Japanese bloom. One thing about Japanese blooms, they're more for show. In our cut flower business, we get into a lot of the doubles and semi-doubles and bomb doubles, but singles in Japanese do not do well as cut flowers.
Well, they've got their own place in the garden.
In the garden, and especially in a garden that has a lot of room. We've seen a lot of peonies here that may take up space. Make sure to plant your peonies about 4 to 5 feet apart on center. Leave enough space for good ventilation. Keep it away from other plants, trees, and shrubs. But let them grow on their own, and you'll be able to enjoy those for generations to come.
Well, Keith, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule during the spring season to show us these fabulous peonies. And I think we saw 200 and some different varieties here. I wish I could take one of each home.
Well, we do too.
Oh. Well, thank you again.
Yes, well, thank you for coming out. We enjoyed having you here.
Closed captioning is provided by Mark and Margaret Yackel Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. Shalom Hill Farm, shalomhill.org.